Hello, viewers. Well, it is I, James Kalm, your half-assed reporter, and we are on East 1st Street, just off the Bowery. So we're going to go in to the HOWL happening. This is just off the Bowery. We're going to talk to this gentleman, Brett De Palma. Hey, Brett, thanks for taking time out to talk with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Let me come in and we'll take a little sweep quickly over the show. People will get an idea of the installation. Well, we're going to start out and I'll just ask you some general questions. This is pretty much a retrospective, or you've got some new work?
It's a mini survey of work that I've done over the past 25 to 30 years. And, you know, they told me put some old and some new things in. And I said, well, this is really just the top of the pile that I've had to edit down for this space. And I'm really thrilled to be able to do it in a non-profit manner and put it into a venue that's not a commercial gallery per se. So it's really exciting for me to do this.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I think for one thing, you get a chance to show some of the more, what can we say, extravagant, some of the larger pieces.
These pieces are from the 80s. This is the earliest piece.
Right, let's go take a look. Let's start out looking at this one right here. Dreaming on the Bowery. And this is from 1982?
82.
Okay, let's take a look at this. Well, we took a little break and I was saying that this actually looks like the Bowery from 1820 or something like that, but you said the Bowery,
what
is it?
19th century. And,
the Bowery was actually a Dutch name for the path, cow path.
This was all farmland. The Bowery was originally kind of, farms and developed by the Dutch, who were the original settlers.
Yes, New Amsterdam.
Waltzed in with their navy and took.
Now you said that you had a studio and you lived down here, not so far away from this place.
Number 5 Bleecker Street, right next to Robert Frank and June Leaf, and I used to see them every day come out and water their tree, and I used to come from there to CBGB's after working late and downtown. I lived on Mott Street between Houston and Prince.
There was a whole scene going on here. I know that Patty Astor, Dan Cameron lived not so far away. I think up on 3rd Street.
Came up on 10th Street, and these were the early days when exiles from Soho, or people, Soho where I worked at a blue chip gallery there, were locked out. So people started their own scenes, and that's really how this evolution of the Lower East Side has always been a pivotal model for how that happens.
Well, that's kind of the way culture moves along, especially in New York.
It's real estate.
That's exactly right. It's real estate. Let's look at this large piece here. I said that I came in the weekend after the show opened, so I guess that's maybe 2 weeks ago now. And so I was looking at some of the pieces.
This is titled Mazeppa, which is based upon a Lord Byron poem, an epic poem about a Tartar prince who was exiled from the Ukraine and tied to a horse, nude to a horse, and set a monk. And it became one of the most popular plays on the Bowery during the 1850s, before the Civil War. And it was popularized because it used to be a man who played the part of Mazeppa until a woman who had herself tied in a nude suit to the back of a live horse on stage and became the most popular play in New York at that time. So this is also a painting, though, that's based upon the idea of escapism and surviving, of the idea that you can leave and survive from, exile. So,
And the other thing I was going to say is that I noticed that this piece is unstretched. Now, is it intentionally unstretched, or you just?
It's intentionally unstretched,
okay,
because I've had it rolled up for 30 years, I think, Lauren, and I thought I'd bring it into the gallery, and I'll see, just as the first time I've seen it, since I showed it in, 91 at Arnold Herstand Gallery, uptown on 57th Street.
Okay, and you got some collage elements in there. Is that pony hide?
This is pony hide, and
I guess that's fitting.
There are elements of other paintings that I ripped up and patched in places that usually my process is building on a collage style of association I think of painters like Soutine, who thought they really couldn't work with a blank canvas and had to have some sort of disruption on the surface of the canvas.
And I hear that Soutine used to go out to the flea shops and pick up, or have his assistants pick up used canvases that he would bring home and sort of maybe scrape them off a little bit so he could work on them and have something to kind of fight against. And this is a big piece. This is what? This is about 9 by 11 feet, something like that?
9 by 10.
9
by
by 10.
12. I'm sorry.
Okay,
9 by
that's
12.
big.
And as I say, I have a storage up in the Catskills where I bought what used to be a slaughterhouse from the early 1900s, and there's no organic matter in it now. But I work up there in the summer when it's not so cold. So.
And all of these pieces, this is all acrylic, or do you have some
They're all
little
acrylic.
oil that you've added in there?
Some oil on acrylic that I've added on top of this is oil, I think, and then because I'm really a slapdash painter, and I use whatever I have available to me, and I'm not a purist in any sense.
Okay.
And so my method is really trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, I guess is the phrase. But,
or a sow's ear out of a silk purse.
Sow's ear out of a silk purse.
Whatever you need.
It works both ways. So
and this also has spray paint in there as well?
There's some spray, there's some...
so you've got no rules. It's like, I'm not going to use this because it's too corny or this or that. It's just like, hey, I feel like this, or maybe you got something left over in the studio.
Well, that's right. And I'll use things. These are from... I guess wallpaper sample books that I find, and I have all sorts of archives of different images that I pull out and both consciously and unconsciously associate so that I come up with a puzzle. I think I'm kind of making puzzles for myself that when I solve them will kind of reveal universal truths that art is capable of doing. So
let's go back to the history a little bit. Now, you said that you were working at Speroni, Westron & Fisher.
That's correct. I worked there from 79 to 84. I think.
Angela Westwater,
Janinzo Speroni, and Conrad Fischer. Who was also
the great
involved
German
with Sigmar
dealer.
Polka and Gerhard Richter, and that group called...
Did you get a chance to meet any of those guys?
I worked with Gerhard Richter a little bit. I never worked with Polka because Conrad was fighting with him at the time.
It seems like everybody was fighting with him.
Well, because he claimed that Polka had stole his polka dots and called them polka dots. So Conrad unfortunately died a few years ago, but he was an interest. So a German, an Italian, and an American, where I was able to kind of watch a changing of the guard from Euro, the three C's, Kiyukuki and Clemente, who came into New York.
Yeah, and you met
they changed the market.
Sandro, and he recommended you to be in the biennial. Was that how you were introduced as a curator?
Emilio Mazzoli, who was in Modena. That was my first show before the show Documenta 7 that I was in, through a German sculptor who came through my studio, and I gave him some slides. And the next thing I knew, I got an invitation at the gallery where I was working to be in Documenta 7. So that kind of launched me into a more international exhibiting program. And that was interesting.
Now, let's get back to, we're going to meld these together. I was wondering about your process because, and we'll come over and look at this. This is another big piece. Now, when you start your paintings, I was going to say, there's a lot of this that actually kind of looks like you're staining and maybe even pouring down large areas.
Sometimes I work
You've
flat
got things like
on
this
the
happening.
floor, and work on the floor system, pouring.
So, but how much of that can you plan? Or is it you're just sort of like letting this go and you're sort of...
put together sketches. I sketch
Oh,
directly
okay.
before I start applying the paint to do a composition that seems to work for me, that always changes in the process.
Right.
So I'll start out with a plan that I then disrupt and let evolve in different ways.
And this one's got snake hides in there.
Hides and
more pony hides
pony
and
stuff, and you know, some of it's inorganic, some of it's organic, but it seems to have survived for 20 something years.
yeah. So they're still hanging together.
With Joe Fabish, I showed this in '89, I believe, and it's been traveled a little bit. But I thought this was a good opportunity to show something in this kind of space that was larger and could be accommodated.
Yeah,
So
well,
it's-
that's why I was saying this is, it's very much a kind of, like you said, a mini retrospective.
Yeah.
Getting back to your working at the gallery and sort of talking about Soho. Now, this is what I was wondering. During the 70s, it was mostly conceptualism, very formalist stuff, and it seemed like minimalism, right? And Soho pretty much totally went in that direction, and painting was frowned upon, and
That's right.
only a few people were sort of making
few
paintings, and
practitioners.
they thought that they were kind of stupid, but and even that was only like high formalism. So what I'm wondering is, and you've mentioned knowing Basquiat and Schnabel and these
That's
people.
true. I met them I met Jean-Michel in 1981 at New York New Wave.
Oh yeah, at PS1. Diego
And
Cortez curated it.
He was somebody who was coming from a post-graffiti, post-punk kind of sensibility, but in the club scenes. And so as a painter, began
Yes.
kind of reviving that, along with Kia, Kuki, and Clemente,
Right.
who also associated with Julian Schnabel,
Now,
David Sal.
yeah, the thing that I want to know is, were you aware of other people? I mean, had you
Sure.
specifically taken notice of another group of people who were sort of maybe going like you were into, what can I call it, kind of a goofy, I guess what became known as the trance avant-garde or Neo-Expressionism,
Well,
but-
I was looking at also new images. There were
right? The new image painters.
new image painters out of Chicago, Harry Hu, that group of people who were predecessors, but also I was aware of people like
The Pictures Generation.
Pictures Generation,
Robert Longo.
Collaborative Projects.
Member of Collab?
I wasn't a member, but I hung out with Collab and went to all of their openings. So I met, those people who all splintered into different, own career kind of solo
Sure.
things. But there was a time when there were collectives and there were artists banding together.
And getting back to the trance avant-garde or the Neo-Expressionism, I mean, did you, while the
Susan Rothenberg,
the
people
form,
like that.
right? But she
Elizabeth
was
Murray.
she was kind of a transitional figure because a lot
That's
of the work
true.
is very kind of formalistic, and then she's kind of layered a little figure thing. Whereas this stuff, it's pretty kooky stuff
Well,
and
I'll tell you, Lauren, the truth,
pretty
when I
goofy.
went-
So
when I went to school, in art school, I was taught to do New York school work, which is
Right.
Frank Stella, David Nolan, and people, and then
maybe you could do a little staining here and there,
That's
Frankenthaler,
right. You
but
could do that. When
you
you-
couldn't put a figure in there, and you definitely wouldn't put something you got out of a comic book unless you're doing something
comics.
poppy.
Well, that came from Mad Magazine, but I think about Tom Noskowski, who was the art
Yes.
director of Mad Magazine for 40 years, and who
Thomas Noskowski was the art director of Mad
Absolutely,
Magazine?
Yeah, for Mad Magazine, and is one of the most eccentric abstractionists that I know of, who's a great painter.
Yeah, I didn't know
but his
that, yeah.
sensibility is totally different from what his business work was. So it's interesting to me when people are having private ideas and sensibilities that are so different from what they present.
Or what they have to do to make a living.
That's right.
Let's keep moving down the wall here. Now, so let's talk again about kind of what was happening here.
In the early 80s.
In the early 80s, Soho is kind of running out of gas in a certain
That's
way, and
right.
so the East Village is sort of taking on more interest and
That's right.
prestige.
People were locked out of the gallery system, which was Soho at that point. But
Right.
minimalism, conceptualism, the market was waning. actually they told me the Carl Andre was going to be the last show. They said, get a job, Brett, and you're going to have to get something.
Right now, Carl had an affair with Angela Westwater for a relationship, at least for a while, right?
There was a big breakup, and in the middle of my trying to install that work, and then at the same time, I met people like Keith Haring, who was working for Tony Shafrazi at that time, and said, Tony's going to start a gallery. I think you should be in it. I said, well,
I went to Tony's place when he was up on 27th Street in Lexington Avenue.
That's correct.
Yeah, I remember going to his gallery back in those days.
That way, but Keith was a pivotal figure in that moment too, where he brought in a lot of people that he had met on the club scene. And I was doing that at nights because you could work during the day. I worked as a dishwasher for almost 10 months, and I would go out every night, and you could survive that way and start to explore New York and the art worlds. Or most of the painters and artists I knew were in bands. Because
were you ever in a band? Are you a musician?
I was before I came to New York. It was called Big Crotch in the Armpits, and we were an anti-music group.
I'm thinking I want to look for the revival tour, the Big Crotch in the Armpits.
But it's an interesting kind of path to the art world because you can approach it from different angles and still find that in New York, at least, I see students who are forming their own little coalitions and groups of people. But this is what happened stylistically during the early 80s. Is
sure.
that people started bonding with each other
through the music,
like-minded.
Okay, let's talk about this now. Is these collages of Bryce Canyon?
These are Bryce Canyon. These are things that were suggestive to me of the underground, or places in the world that were open to the underworld. And I'm always thinking about the underground in ways, having come from that. So I started to make this painting of hell. It turned into a classic theme of hell, and I'm using kinds of things that are certainly well-traveled themes in the art world and art history, and trying to update them in ways that make sense to me.
And this piece has probably got more collage on it than just about any of the other pieces.
Totally, almost total collage, except for this old painting of this woman that I did, and then I cut it out, and then I started to get ideas from pieces, so that the sum of the parts is
greater than
more than the
individual pieces. Okay, let's keep rolling on here.
This is called Sails Are Up, and I was thinking of kind of snake oil salesman, and it's a metaphor for the art world or other sectors in the economy where money dominates, and that the idea of the economy booming like it is now is a kind of an illusion of sorts, because if you look at the economy as a measure of success in the art world, I think eventually you'll be disappointed. I've lived through probably 3 recessions, major recessions, where all the money disappeared in the art world and went into other sectors. Now it's flowing again, coming back in, but this is also a kind of fun house theme, and Goya did a painting with kind of banner with this similar face on it. But again, it's along that theme of being...
Well, I like the way that a lot of this, you're talking about the staining, but one of the nice things about it is staining with the acrylics and just painting with thin acrylics in general is that you get this very dry surface.
It's dry.
And it really lets you see the color in a more kind of a crisp way.
Has a luminosity to it that I like, and it's very fast. I really became a fast painter, I guess, during the 80s and early Tudor, because it just seemed like things were moving so rapidly and they probably wouldn't last. So I took an approach of working very rapidly, and acrylic afforded me that possibility.
Now, did you paint with oils before that? And we're looking at one of your sculptures.
On oak timbers that when they tore up the cobblestones on Mott Street where I lived, I just dragged these timbers inside, started to carve them, thinking like, oh, I'll do some totems. And I did maybe 7 of these and painted them for different kind of ethnic ideas of personages. So
Okay. And I think these are oils.
Recent.
Are these oil or?
This year, these are some oil,
Okay.
oil and acrylic, and mixes with resists that started to do this, kind of capillary action that I liked, and I thought, well, that works as a kind of underwater, undersea atmosphere. And I've done a lot of small canvases in the last couple of years too, just to alternate.
Sometimes small paintings can be great paintings. I mean, some of the greatest Picassos I've ever seen are like 24, 28 by 30, 36 inches.
This is called the Slaughter of Innocents, and it's based upon the idea that there are always some sort of slaughtering going on in the world with, from Johannesburg to, Alabama, and, the idea that children are usually the most vulnerable victims of social upheaval. So this is a kind of commentary on that human foible.
Now, say some of these images like these two figures, do you work from photographs or do you just use your imagination?
This was from a photograph, and I believe it was South Africa that I took some of this, but then I added some figures too from other sources. I keep all kinds of source material in my studio, so I'll just, when I'm stuck on something, I'll sort through imagery and look at sources and think, well, maybe this will be good in the mix. And so this was kind of a mix of the sacred and the profane too, and the idea of the free life or the simple life. And the hunting dog with Remington shotgun shells is kind of a reference to gun culture in the Western world, particularly. And
okay, let's come around the corner. Actually, I like this piece partially because of the I don't know what you call that, the sparkly, glittery.
There's some glitter in there too, because
this is not regular glitter. This is
glitter too, Lauren, because I wanted it to be, in keeping with the title, which is Circus Trump. So that this, in a way, is done 2 years ago, where I was really addressing the idea of this powerful figure, kind of a muscle man, and you can see that he has barbells working here, lifting and standing on the world with primates around him, maybe offspring.
Is this a Romare Bearden?
That's a Romare Bearden from a calendar.
Photograph calendar.
So I take calendars and found things on the street. I find things on the street and keep them as imagery that I like. So
you got some metallic paint in there
of different things.
Well, back to the early East Village days, and you hanging out with people like Jean-Michel and Keith Haring and Kenny Scharf, and there was a whole crowd of people. A lot of them were sort of orbiting around the Fun Gallery, and
that's right. Those were important people to me because they were a little bit younger than I was, but I've always kind of played to the kids in a way too, Lauren. I think that
the kids are fun.
People all have a better eye of the future and a key to the highway that leads out of the mess that we're in a current state, and see ways of inventing and innovating new ways of seeing and thinking. So I identified with that group of people, and my sensibility with Jean-Michel as a kind of kindred spirit of humor and using humor in a satirical and sardonic way.
Sure.
And arcane, the ideas of the arcane and things which are not such a conventional way of seeing or thinking have always been interesting to me. I've always been attracted to that as opposed to classical themes.
Well, yes, I think one of the things also that a lot of people don't realize is that even before Jean-Michel became well known as a painter, that he was kind of a mascot of the whole Lower East Side thing, and people were already making movies about him, and he was working with bands.
A social figure who
that's right, ubiquitous. That's a good word.
A social genius who could move through different populations of people.
He's very handsome and exotic and energetic,
charming, very seductive person.
Yes.
Who had a personality that was suited for the fame that he wanted and achieved in his lifetime. So,
But there's a tragic side to that as well.
It's a tragedy within a tragedy. And this is really something that the art world has, is littered with tragedies of artists who are
Yes.
never seen, who never really have any kind of return on their labors. So that's a classic kind of example of how that can be magnified.
Let's move on to the next. Now this is a grouping of paintings, but you've got them hung together almost like a triptych.
This turned into what I think of as my altarpiece in a way, where these were
Okay, yeah.
on either side. This is called Iraq Ribs, and this is called Who meets Lear and Hamlet.
And this is John
And
F.
this is
Kennedy, JFK pondering his own
bust here.
bust.
So, using this figure, the political figure, and these two presidential images, and butting up the two canvases on each side, this is a kind of installation thought that I had in putting things together, that my work will kind of flow into each other.
Now, did you have an idea? I mean, have you ever exhibited this piece or these pieces together like this, or you just sort of had an idea and said, "Hey, this would work," and I'll.
An opportunity for me to try
that's
different
good.
things, and I thought, oh, this works. My work does tend to kind of work together in ways where I felt I could butt things up like that, and then it did turn into a kind of triptych altarpiece for me, which is a classic form that I liked. So these are images that I've thought about in terms of what do I do with my anger about these perpetual wars that we're involved in.
Well, we'll keep looking at this for a while, but also I want to kind of wrap up our discussion of life in the East Village and that whole scene. We were talking about Jean-Michel, and he did have incredible success. He was well recognized during his lifetime, and he was very young at the time. And then, I think for like the last 2 years of his life, basically he became a pariah, and a lot of people just thought that he flipped out. And I know that he probably had some drug problems and other things happening.
Yeah, that happened also, but also the critical base that he had established really kind of moved on.
Now,
and he felt like, well, what happened? My work hasn't changed that much.
Yes,
but my critical attention has, and this is the marketplace.
Well,
the way the marketplace
we're
works.
gonna discuss that a little bit more. We were talking about how you've been through a couple of recessions and seen things happen.
That's right.
And but in the art world, you've also got groups of people. A lot of them are critics. A lot of them work for particular magazines that are able, to exert their influence.
That's right.
And basically, a lot of people in New York are not what I would call independent thinkers. So when you get a group of people saying this is good or that's bad, or it's time to move on, there's a lot of the people that are spending money just follow the lead like so many sheep. And in this case, I'm going to name names. I think the group around October Magazine,
Yes.
and Rosalind Krauss, Hal Foster, we know the names,
right.
Benjamin Baclo.
Yeah.
They basically went on a jihad against the Neo-Expressionists and the whole East Village scene, and kind of forced their aesthetic down everyone's throat, and that happened to be the pictures generation and a more, what could I call it, a more cool, and in certain ways it was even a more provincial kind of, New York version of the art world.
That's a good word, provincialism, because I think New York can be very provincial in a lot of ways.
And in a certain way, not only you, but Basquiat, Haring, myself, and thousands of other artists from the East Village, well, not that I was ever in the East Village, but people who were dealing with kind of goofy figuration, reevaluation of painting in general and expressionism in general, but also kind of questions of things like kitsch and taste and bad taste.
Neo-pop,
Yeah. So that all got pushed out of the way and kind of replaced by what I guess I would call it sort of photo-based conceptualism.
Or Neo-Geo at the time, I think.
Yes, but they're kind of like the children of the pictures generation people.
That's right. But this is also about universities and colleges that people
Absolutely.
come out of.
Yes,
the
academia,
Cal
academia.
Arts crowd, or,
Yes.
or you think about the Yale crowd, or the Columbia crowd. So these little fiefdoms that come out of art schools too play out within the art world, and so there are kind of loyalties that go astray, I think, from the aesthetic principles of looking and thinking with your eyes as opposed to your ears. And I think a lot of the art world functions on rumor and talk, so that the talk of who is in and who's out is always a flux of information that necessarily has nothing to do with the work itself. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so writers and critics and people who do that kind of work is really about itself. As art is about art, writing is about writing.
Criticism is about the critic.
So that's why you see schools of different
Yes.
aesthetics. I remember when I was asked to be in Documenta, I had to come through Kosha von Bruggen, who was married to Oldenburg at that time. She came to my studio and said, "We're going to use you politically against Julian Schnabel." And I said, "Well, I don't understand why you would do that, because I like Julian, and this is not something that's." She said, "Well, you're only allowed one piece." So I called the curator in Germany, and he said, no, you send as many as you want, which is what I wound up doing. But that was when I first was introduced to the politic of the art world versus the politic of economics. And I thought, this is about people losing their economy. So people fight in different ways around
Yes.
the markets too. So,
Yes.
So this is
The field of cultural production, and everybody staking their claims within that, and pushing out everyone else that
industrialization
doesn't help
of the
them.
art world.
I think we'll wrap up on that note. Brett, again, we'll sort of scan over everything. One of the things I wanted to say is we were talking about the way art communities come and go. The art market is up, it's down, galleries open, they close, neighborhoods like Soho and the East Village come and go and change, but
these
it's
are
the
cultural
artist.
communities,
Right.
too, Lauren. So I would like to say too about the market, just briefly, that's only one important way of measuring quality within the art world. And
The financial market,
and
yes,
the financial
the money end of it.
success. But I also think that cultural,
Absolutely.
this is a cultural endeavor that's about history.
Cultural capital
and you bet. And so
Yes,
that, I think
I
that
agree.
might be, while money does float all boats to some extent, it still doesn't ensure long-term insight and culture, which is really a better measure if you look at the history of art. It's about
That's exactly
it's
right.
littered with artists whose market moved on and went to other new grist for the mill.
I get into conversations about this all the time, and I keep thinking about Francis Picabia.
Oh yes.
And you saw his show that was up at the Modern about 6 months ago. It was a wonderful show. I went back a couple times. But I keep, people keep saying, "Oh, he was so great, he was so fantastic, the paintings are going for so much money." But as I read the book, it's like, yeah, he had this show in Madrid and nothing sold, but he kept working. Then he had this show in Paris and nothing sold, but he kept working. And then he had this show here, and it's like they sold 2 paintings for very cheap prices, but he kept working. So in certain ways, you're exactly right that there is a value beyond just the dollars and cents, that it, being part of culture, having your little voice in the conversation going is important.
That's what I'm interested in.
All right, Brett. Well, thanks for your time and your comments. Sweep over here. And as we always say at this point, thank you, Kate. You can leave your comments, posts, opinions below. Thanks. Oh, beautiful. Thank you.